If we really think about that, what do we see? Which is a very important idea, that God has frozen, He has paralyzed, He has stopped civilization. That's really what we're witnessing. It's like God said to the civilization, stop, totally. And everybody has to stay in their house, you see, and be frightened, right? Forget about livelihood. God, in effect, has put a halt to civilization. And that's a very important idea. Why? You see, but that is a central feature of this. What is interesting to note is the concept that, imagine what it takes to hold civilization. A virus is about, if I remember correctly, it's about 40 nanometers. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. And this little virus, you cannot see it with the naked eye or even a microscope. You need an electron microscope to see this. Could you imagine that God can call forth a creature 40 nanometers, right? And that can hold civilization. We begin to understand the absolute power of God to stop civilization, mankind, in its tracks. It's just absolutely awesome. But anyway, those seem to be the three major features. Pachad Mavos, the fear of death, quarantine, and the economic collapse of countries. Like I say, even though that there is the feature of death and also sickness and suffering, that seems, however, not to be what is usually common in an epidemic, especially the greatest epidemics which I have mentioned. So the question is, what exactly does this mean? We've identified the major features of this pandemic, you see, but why? You see, and that's what I want to begin to explain. What God is trying to do, based on the divine agenda, when you think about it in a certain way, is to bring the redemption. And we will now understand something very important, that this dever, this plague, its basic purpose is to bring the geula, but this is a necessary forerunner or prerequisite. What brings the geula? What brings the redemption? Well, we know what the concept is, you see. There's a tikkun process. There is a process of rectifying creation. And we know that the Jews are the major characters or actors that do this, you see. That's what they do. This is a tikkun process. It's a process of restoration or to rectify, which really means to bring God back into creation. God concealed himself and said to mankind, and then subsequently he said to Avraham Avinu, Abraham, and the Jewish people, it is your job to bring me back. And not only that, but we also know that the major vehicles or instruments that we do this is through mitzvahs, doing commandments, okay. And not only that, but if we sin, there's tshuva, there's repentance. And if we don't do repentance, then of course, for these sins and the transgressions, then there's what's called yisurin. There's what's called suffering. And those three things are called the tikkun devices. You see, mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin. Those are the tikkun devices. You see, and that's what brings, in many ways, the redemption. You see, however, even all with that, there's still, so therefore we could say that this is what does the redemption, or the geula itself, right, and brings the Mashiach. These are called the tikkun devices, you see. But the tikkun itself, in it of itself, proceeds slowly. And in certain ways, we are at the end of the process, which I had mentioned in many of my other shurim and so on, that the tikkun process is coming to an end. But what's the problem then? The problem is that there are certain major obstacles. What are the obstacles for the redemption? And the answer to that is the prosecution of the Satan, the kitrugan of the Satan. Now the Satan, of course, is an adversary. In fact, he is the prosecuting angel. And his job, in many ways, is to uphold or to defend justice. That's really what his job is. And therefore, he's always being makatre, kitrug, What is that? It's called prosecution. You see? And those kitrugim which actually tries to defend justice or promote justice is an obstacle, because God will only bring the redemption after the justice has been satisfied, which is a very important idea. Justice has to be fulfilled, and then the redemption can come. The problem is, the Sultan is prosecuting this, and therefore what does he do? He slows it down. Why? Because God, because he created the world through justice, din, he has to accommodate the din. And as a result of that, he's got to slowly, incrementally bring the redemption, but he has to address the kitrug of the Sultan. That's a very important idea. Which brings us to another idea. What are the obstacles today? Besides the tikkun process, which is what completes the redemption process, what are the main ideas which are obstacles that the Sultan is being mekatreg? That the Sultan is doing what? He is prosecuting, right? And he's saying he's saying to God, you can't bring the redemption because there's certain violations or sins or transgressions that the Jews are doing, and certainly mankind is doing. So because everybody benefits from the redemption, Jewish people of course, and all of mankind benefits from the redemption, and the Sultan is saying you can't do it. So then the question is, what does that mean? What are the obstacles today? What is the main complaints or the major arguments that the Sultan is propounding to God? And I believe that there are basically three of them, although there are many others, but the chief ones, I believe there are really three. Let's take a look what they are. One, Zimo, preachers. We live in a generation, as we will see, well, let me just sum it up and then we'll go into each one more in detail. The first one is called Zimo, preachers. Okay, tremendous amount of immorality, depravity, degeneration, corruption. You see, there's an enormous amount. Certainly in the last 20, 30 years, the world is involved in an obsession with immorality. Just take a look at the countries of the world. How many people are involved in all kinds of terrible immorality. So that's one. The second thing, so that is where mankind is corrupting his own nature, as we will see. The second major obstacle and prosecution of the Sultan is the destruction of civilization by mankind. How? And that's the concept of sinas chinam, baseless hatred. In the last 10, 20 years, there's an incredible amount of hatred that is present in the world. And this hatred, of course, is fostered by Lashon Hara, by slander, defamation, you see, informing. There's a tremendous amount of hatred, whether it be as we will see in the United States or Israel and so on, and around the entire world. So therefore, and there's no unity here, there's no achdus. So therefore, that is a second thing that the Sultan says. Mankind is destroying itself, you see, because of the unbelievable amount of hatred and enmity that people have toward each other, which of course, most of it is brought about by Lashon Hara, especially as we know, through the internet and social services and so on, social media and so on. So that's a second major obstacle. The third major obstacle is that everybody is completely immersed in what? In materialism, in pleasure, physicality, gashmius. Everybody's into this. How many people are really involved in spirituality, what's called ruchnius? Very few. The world is completely immersed, obsessed with materialism and enjoying the world. What's left for spirituality? So I believe these are the three major complaints, so to speak, of the Sultan. Again, immorality is one. Tremendous hatred Two, and the third thing, of course, is tremendous pursuit of materialism, physicality, with no idea of spirituality.